the kind of huge emotions that come with a loss by suicide that I could never have been prepared for. I've heard loss by suicide described as grief with a microphone, because all of those emotions that you would expect to come with a loss, like sadness, like that kind of emptiness and the loneliness, they're all amplified. But for me, the biggest emotion that I was feeling at the time was anger. Steve and I had been married for, well, we've been together for 18 years, and we'd raised children together, and we spoke about everything. And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he'd left for work that morning and said nothing about the fact that this is what he intended to do. He never had any mental health issues as far as I knew. I kind of hit rock bottom, and I needed to drag myself out of that place. But I went for a different form of therapy. And the first thing that the therapist said to me, she said, was she could feel this lack of optimism or any sense of hope towards the future. And suddenly hope became a really important word for me. So I was trying to switch that anger into something more future focused, more hopeful.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune into what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your terms. But before we dive in, I've got a quick favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and helps us grow, reach more women, and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support that's right for you. Caroline, thank you for joining me today on my podcast. It's great to have you on. I'm really grateful for you to be on the podcast, because I know the journey that you're going to be talking about is something that's, an emotional journey. I have read your book, Daddy Blackbird, and it's all about your experience and your journey with suicide and grief. And of course, the term double parenting that we you use now. So please, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey from where you were to, the suicide, and to where you are now? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be asked to have these conversations, because I think they're so important for people to understand, and we'll get onto that later. So yeah, I'm Caroline. I am an internal communications consultant. I now run my own organisation doing internal communications focused on wellbeing. I have 2 children. At the time of my husband's suicide, they were just 9 and 2 years old. I always start by saying that we were a perfectly normal family, whatever we would class as normal these days. But there was 2 parents, 2 children. Steve was working full time as a field marketing manager. I was working part time, still kind of coming out the other side of that baby stage. And Steve was starting a new role that day. And as I say, everything about our life that day, everything I was experiencing felt very normal. I was completely unaware that our lives were going to be turned upside down on the 12th of November 2018, when Steve left for work and never came home. I never saw him again after that.
I have read the book, and of course, being a complete outsider, looking into that and having no experience or knowledge about suicide, reading your book was a complete eye-opener for me. And at times I felt, with grief I could relate, but obviously the grief of suicide is very different. Can you talk through that? Because a lot of people will experience some form of grief in their life. You know, they will lose someone at some point through natural causes or a car accident or, you know, these kinds of things. But suicide is a different type of grief from what I've read in your book. And I can feel that as well. Can you talk through that a little bit? You know, the difference of that. And also, you know, grief is a very individual experience for everyone. You know, your experience with grief in relation to suicide compared to someone else's will be very different as well. And also it's an evolving experience. So how has your relationship with grief changed as well since 2018?
Okay. So first of all, the first part of that question, I think the difference between grief by suicide and any other kind of grief. We'd had lots of losses within our family. In a 3-year period, we'd lost 3 of our parents between us, Steve and I. And that was from a brain tumor. That was his dad, which was a really sad illness for a year. His mother died when she was hit by a car, which was a really tragic accident, but very sudden. And then the year after that, my dad died from lung cancer, which was a kind of period of a few months. So we've experienced all sorts of different losses, but I had never known anyone die by suicide. So as you say, it's a completely different experience. And again, people may know somebody through different connections. It might be a friend or a distant relative or a work colleague. But when it comes to a partner or a close family member, again, it's a completely different experience. For me, some of the biggest differences are the kind of huge emotions that come with a loss by suicide that I could never have been prepared for. I've heard loss by suicide described as grief with a microphone, because all of those emotions that you would expect to come with a loss, like sadness, like that kind of emptiness and the loneliness, they're all amplified because of the situation, because it's so sudden, because of the stigma that's involved and that sense of not knowing how to explain it to other people. But for me, the biggest emotion that I was feeling at the time was anger. Steve and I had been married for, we'd been together for 18 years and we'd raised children together and we spoke about everything. And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he'd left for work that morning and said nothing about the fact that this is what he intended to do. He never had any mental health issues as far as I knew. No intention whatsoever to do this. So the anger that I felt, whether that was well-placed or misplaced anger at the time, was huge for me. The complete confusion and that desperate need to talk about all of this with the person that was closest to me, and that was my husband, the person that was responsible for this whole catastrophe and trauma that I was going through. There's also that sense of abandonment, that in our minds we feel that the person we've lost has made a choice to step away from us and from our loved ones. And I looked at my 2 children and I couldn't bear that sense of abandonment on their behalf, that Steve had left, and they would never have a dad again. And we had a lifetime of confusion and grief to work through. So there's so many complexities emotionally when it comes to a loss by suicide. And we work through them and we come to some sense of understanding over time, but that takes a long time to work through. But then there's all the kind of logistical, practical things as well. So I had to give a statement to the police about the weeks and months leading up to Steve's death, which felt like a really intimidating experience. I felt like I needed to give answers that I didn't have. Grieving. We had the funeral, and then Christmas was a horrendous experience without Steve here. But then we had the inquest directly after that, which again was something I'd never experienced. Hearing people talk about Steve in a very clinical way, how he was found, all the kind of different issues surrounding that, hearing the police officer who'd been first on the scene stand up and read their report in graphic detail was a horrendous experience. All of these different elements that you wouldn't go through with a different type of loss are all kind of thrown in to the mix, and just impossible to get your head around. I think that's probably the best way to explain a loss by suicide is just this complete overwhelm and confusion.
Yeah, I suppose, I can see a distinction with, obviously, if it's someone that you've lost through natural causes, whether it's a heart attack or cancer or something has happened to them, a car accident, there may be a bit of anger, in the sense that, you're angry because, you've lost someone that you love and so on. But the type of anger with suicide is almost like, why did you do this to us? And that's the sense I got from the book as well, and I could feel the anger when I was reading it, and I felt angry myself reading your book, thinking, why would someone do that?
Yeah.
Leave no clues, not even suggest something is wrong, and then all of a sudden just disappear. And I suppose, with that kind of anger, it's a bit more difficult to process. So how did you process that, and how did you get through that? And are you over that anger period, or is it still there? Because I don't know, I feel like for me, I don't think I could get rid of that anger,
No, I never felt that I would be able to either. And it's coming up for 7 years now. And I would never say that time is a healer. It's not, but it does give us an opportunity to understand things in a different way, learn to accept things in a different way, find different perspectives through different activities, different therapies, different people. So I've been on a very long and complex journey. Like I say, right at the start, the anger was everything. It took over my entire life, and I turned to drinking, self-harming, all sorts of really damaging habits that were not good for me or my children. And I realized after falling into a very damaging relationship in this desperate attempt to try and replace what I'd lost in my partner, and this relationship being awful and just not what I needed at the time or what my children needed. I kind of hit rock bottom, and I needed to drag myself out of that place. And that's when I'd had PTSD therapy, which had helped to kind of take the edge off the triggers and the emotional responses to some of the things that I was experiencing. But I went for a different form of therapy, which was a kind of gentler form of talking therapy. And the first thing that the therapist said to me, this was right in the middle of COVID, so it was all virtual as well. But the first thing she said was she could feel this lack of optimism or any sense of hope towards the future. And suddenly hope became a really important word for me. So I was trying to switch that anger into something more future focused, more hopeful. And I was also absolutely exhausted. Not only was I dealing with all these emotions, which put me in a kind of permanent fight or flight mode, but being a double parent and dealing with everything on my own was just shattering. And she said, I can see that you're exhausted. I can see it's hard to function, but hope is the most important thing. And I will carry hope for you until you're able to carry it for yourself. And that was a turning point for me. I felt that I was being supported, carried, not just by her, but by friends and other people within my community. And I started to form what I called my triangle of recovery. So the shape of a triangle was something that was forming in my mind. When we were a family of four, we were a square, and we had our four straight sides and four tidy corners, and there was two adults, two children, and we fitted in the four chairs around the table and the four seats in the car, and it all made sense, and it was neat and tidy. And then we'd suddenly overnight become a three, and I couldn't get my head around this number three. I just fought against it. But I suddenly started to embrace this number three when I realized that I needed to do something, and I embraced this new shape. So I moved from the shape of a square and a four to the triangle and a three, and I started to form this triangle of recovery. And I realized that there were three key elements that I needed to focus on, and that was myself, my children, and my community. So in order to manage some of this anger and to move towards a hopeful place, I looked at what I needed to do initially with myself, and I dug deep and found some of the strength I knew I had there as a strong woman. But I also needed to learn new things. I needed to learn a new way of life. I needed to learn how to function whilst living with grief. So I read loads of books. I read things like Emotional Agility by the amazing author Susan David.
Yeah, I've read that book. It's amazing.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah. And I would recommend it to everybody, regardless of what you've been through. I think it's brilliant. But I also did things like I joined a gym, and I focused on my physical health as well. I continued with my therapy, and I focused on my career and my professional development, and I ended up doing a diploma, which I kind of parked a few years before that when things turned upside down. So I looked at so many different aspects of me, because that's where things needed to start. And I stopped drinking, I stopped self-harming, I started doing things that were much more wholesome, like gardening, which was something quite new to me. And that was quite transformative. And then I focused on my children, because that was the most important thing to me, and dealing with their grief and helping them navigate through this loss, and growing older and going to school and then starting to go through puberty and all those sorts of things that children face anyway, regardless. And I was seeing the resilience in them that I was then feeding off of as well. And then I focused my third part of my triangle of recovery on my community, and removing people that weren't serving me anymore, inviting in people that I knew would support me, realizing that I had a lot to give back with things like writing the book, telling my story, helping bring comfort to people that were in a similar position to me, sharing daily on platforms like LinkedIn to explain what life is like for a double parent, a working mother who was grieving, who was working, who was learning, who was doing all of these sorts of things, and helping to inspire other people, but also connecting with people in a similar position to me. So yeah, to summarize, I shifted from being a very angry shell of a person to focusing on this triangle of recovery, which was all about me, my children, and my community, and bringing those three elements together to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I read about the triangle as well. Obviously, I've read the whole book now.
Yes.
And the way you put that in the book as well, it was kind of, oh wow, now I see, it was almost like the change from the square to the triangle, and how you helped yourself, and the different change, it's a mindset shift that you had, a very, very big mindset shift. Now, you talk about the term double parenting, which I had never thought about before. It was always, it's always the word single parent.
Yes.
And that's the kind of term we throw around. And whether you're widowed, whether you're, divorced or don't have a partner and adopt and you're a single parent, it's always to single parent. So where did this term double parent come from, and why, and what does that mean, and how does that work in your life? Because being a double parent is, I'm assuming, extremely tiring and exhausting, and it brings a whole new dimension to parenting.
Absolutely. And it's such a big factor in all of this. So I would always have used the term single parenting because it's the only term I was aware of. But somebody I know who I got to know through this process, actually, through sharing my story and connected with him on LinkedIn. His name's Dave, and he's a fantastic guy. He'd heard of this term double parenting and introduced it to me to say, you're not a single parent doing the kind of single work. You're a double parent doing double the work. You've got double the responsibilities. It's double everything because the person that you chose to raise children with is no longer there. I made a choice that I would have children based on the situation that I was in at the time. And that was with a partner who was very caring, very, very practical, an amazing dad. I could never have done any of that on my own. Those early baby days, both children were poorly and in and out of hospital. And you work as a team. Any sort of parents would know that feeling of working as a team. Often it doesn't feel like you're a team, but that's how you operate. And suddenly overnight, this shock of becoming one parent. And initially there was that sense of, I need to stay alive. That was all I could think, was that I need to remain alive now, because otherwise my children will be orphans. And that was the kind of initial response to what was going on. Then there's this realization over time that, oh my God, I've got so much to do on my own. There's nobody to turn to. There's all the decisions to make. There's all the practical things in the house that need doing. As I say, the children were 9 and 2. They were at nursery and school. Neither of them slept particularly well. And then all that grief thrown in. It was completely exhausting. And I remember thinking the only way I can really get through this is one day at a time. And often I had to break that down into 1 hour at a time to just function and get through each day. But as time went on, and I'd kind of been introduced to this term of double parenting and eased up on myself a little bit. I'm also quite a perfectionist, and I realized this is not the environment to be a perfectionist in. There's just no option. So I had to kind of balance things up and let go of a lot of things and realize that I could still be a good parent without having to be a perfect parent. But I'm still a double parent. I always will be, but now my children are 15 and 8. And we've kind of grown together. So they've understood their role within this triangle of the 3 of us, the trio, rather than the 4 of us in the square that we were. And we all kind of work together as a family, rather than me being this kind of double parent leading the family. It's more of a team of 3 now, which has made a massive difference. But yeah, in those earlier days, being a double parent, not somebody that kind of has their kids through the week and then they go off to their dad at the weekend, and you get that break to go out with your friends or clean the house or go to the gym or do all those things that you can't that well with kids around.
Yeah.
It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with double the responsibilities of a family with 2 parents.
How has this impacted your children? Because I know, they were very young, and especially your 2-year-old, I'm assuming probably didn't understand as much, because, when you're 2, I have children myself, and I know 2-year-olds tend to be, their thinking is very, very different. How has it impacted the children, and how have they got through that, and how did you have to support them through that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. With the 2-year-old, the understanding is completely different, and I had very different conversations with both of them. I was fortunate that on the very day that we found out about Steve dying, when the police came to say that he'd been found, we also had a visit from somebody from the school network who gave us lots of information. I mean, I wasn't in any fit state to hear things, but I had a friend with me who was trying desperately to work out what to do. And we were introduced to a charity for bereaved children called Winston's Wish, and they're absolutely fantastic. And they sent us a guide specifically for children who have been bereaved through suicide. And it had a kind of 5-step process of how you initiate the conversation, and then move through the different stages of opening up more and giving more information, to then talking about some of the reasons why that person might have taken their own life and dealing with it in a more kind of long-term way. We also spoke to their helpline on that first day, and they gave us the kind of words that we would need to tell my older daughter, who was 9. She was at school at the time. And I was advised from day one with both of them, but more so with Evie being older and able to understand more, that honesty was the most important thing, and being very clear, allowing no room for doubt or misunderstanding. I had to be clear with the language that I used, and to say that Daddy had died, he'd taken his own life. Didn't have to give graphic detail at that point in time, but they were obviously shocked. I mean, Ada, the younger child, she was just kind of getting on as a 2-year-old would, but with Evie, she understood everything. She knew what suicide meant. She mental health issues were, but having it hit your own family is a completely different story. And clearly we were shattered, all of us. But with children, they've lost their dad, the only dad they ever had or ever will have. So they had a lot to get through, and they had therapy as they've got older, or different types of therapy outside of school. They've had support inside of school, and they both still do have weekly sessions with a kind of emotional therapist to just voice how they're feeling. There's all sorts of different stages that they've had to come across and deal with, through understanding that they don't have a dad anymore, but their friends do, and accepting that is a very hard thing. And then things as they've got older, for Evie in particular, when she started senior school, hearing the way that other kids talk about things like suicide and mental health in quite a derogatory way, or a very kind of throwaway comments like, "I'll kill myself if I have to sit through another maths lesson like that," or something like that. Evie really struggled with that. So, as I said earlier, I've seen the resilience in them. It's been astounding. Despite the pain and everything that they've been through, there's still moments where they've really shone and shown me this incredible strength. And in those moments when Evie was struggling with that language, she did what I do and turned to writing as a kind of way of dealing with it. And she wrote a story about how it made her feel. And it was just a short story, and it was eventually turned into an animation, which I shared. It then got shared on to organisations, corporate organisations, public sector. It started being shared within the NHS. It was shared in schools all around the country. It became part of curriculums all around the country, all about being more considerate with the language that we use. And she then went on to win a National Mental Health Award. She now does assemblies in her school and other schools to raise awareness around this subject. And to see that 9-year-old, who I had to sit down and explain, your dad has taken his own life on that day, come now into this kind of flourishing, confident young woman who's out there telling her story and teaching other people, is just mind-blowing. And you can kind of imagine the pride that I feel in her, and Ada now doing the same but in a kind of 8-year-old's version. Just copying her sister, and everything that she does is just magical.
That's fantastic. I think, you know, ultimately, I feel like with your support and your resilience, you know, you've shown your children a different way forward. And it feels like, you know, because you do have children, it's been a very different process. And it's almost like they've been your guiding light to get through this, because, you know, whatever happened to you, if you didn't have children, it potentially could have been a whole different story, a whole different journey. Yeah. But with your children there, for you, your focus is, I need to survive and get through this for my children.
Yeah.
Because, you know, obviously the fear of not being there for your children and them being left and orphaned and things like that, that's, you know, another one of the worst things you can think of as well.
Yeah.
Now, you know, you say that, you know, one of your daughters, she's processed it in a different way, and now she's doing all these amazing things. Do you have a constant worry about your children, thinking, you know, into the future, that, you know, with mental health issues, I guess that's the key thing, you know, will they be okay? They might seem okay now, especially understanding that, you know, Steve looked okay. He seemed okay. He never said anything. Do you worry that your children also might be going down the same path, and you will never know? And if, you know, it's that constant fear, but it's like with anyone, you know, that it could manifest in anyone. But with you going through that, do you have that?
I absolutely do. It's a constant fear that I've had to learn to live with. I found out very early on that children bereaved by suicide are 4 times more likely to go on to take their own lives as young adults, or even later in life. And those adults left behind are 65% more likely to take their own lives as well. And knowing those statistics is terrifying, because you can almost think, what goes on in their minds that they're not articulating? Are they thinking things like, well, if my dad did it, then it's okay for me to do? And having all these awful thought processes. I think that the biggest thing that I've done there is just to remain open at all times and honest, to have these conversations. There's only so much we can do. But if we can have a space that is completely safe to talk about anything at all, and we've explored the worst there is to discuss when it comes to the loss of a parent by suicide between us. So there's nowhere we won't go as a threesome to have conversations about everything.
Yeah.
So that they know that they can discuss anything, and we do. But it doesn't take away that worry. It doesn't take away the fact that at any point they could be bullied at school, or they could get into a very difficult relationship and feel trapped in a relationship, or whatever those reasons are that people take their own lives. I can't protect them from those reasons, but be more aware, particularly after what we've been through, of the impact that moments like that can have, and the support that is needed constantly. Life is difficult for all of us. Struggle is always there, one way or another, for everybody, and we can't avoid that, but we can be more conscious of how to take care of ourselves, how to become more emotionally strong and more resilient and more agile in the way that we think about things and the way that we respond to challenges in life. And that's something that between the three of us we work on pretty much daily.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to touch upon one thing, which I think is really important. And in your book, you talk about it, and that's friendships. And that was one part of the book that really kind of got to me. And I thought, am I that friend that says, I will be there for you, or if you need anything, let me know, and then I'm not? Because
Yes.
that's some of the, yeah, you know, and it got me thinking about myself as well. Am I that person? You know, maybe occasionally I am, but how does that affect you? Because, I want to address it for the audience, that if they have that friend, perhaps not, have gone through suicide, but is going through something, whatever that might be, and you actively say, I'm here for you, and then you're perhaps not. How did that make you feel? And what kind of advice would you give for people that do say those things quite flippantly, really?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one it's a subject that's impacted me massively. In the early days, it was November when Steve died, and we had a lot of support. A lot of people rallied round, and we felt that we were protected by this bubble of support. And then Christmas came along, and people were off doing their Christmas shopping and going to parties, and after that, they never came back. And people would say, like you say, things like, where I am if you need me, which is a phrase I absolutely hate, because I am a double parent. I'm knackered. I'm grieving. I have everything to do in my home, in my life. I don't have time to reach out to you and tell you to check in on me or tell you to help me. So I learned very early on the difference between people that say, where I am if you need me, and people that proactively, which is the key word, proactively check in, reach in regularly, even if it's just a text message to say, don't expect a response. I know you're knackered, but I'm here, and I'll message you again tomorrow. And I'm a very practical person. So there's, along with the emotional support, it's the practical logistical stuff as well. So friends that recognized the most important thing to me was my children, and they need the functional logistical support. They were the kind of key people to me. So they would come around, take the girls out for walks, come around and play games with them, do virtual calls with them while I was trying to tidy the house or work or whatever it was that I was doing. So it was that practical stuff as well. But it's that message of don't just say you're there, actually be there and stay there. Don't be there for 3 months or 6 months and then shift off. This situation I now find myself in is a permanent situation. And if you're a true friend, then you'll recognize that and you'll be here for the long haul, for me, but more importantly, for my children.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to put this across, because I am totally guilty of saying, where I am when you need me, or if you need me. And I have said that. I'm sure I've said that.
I think I probably used to say it as well. And it feels like a really warm, kind thing to say. And
but
perhaps
it's a way out, almost. It's an easy way out, it feels like now. After reading your book, honestly, I may not be able to relate to what you've been through, but it's actually helped me process certain things and learn certain things as well. And, I encourage anyone that, perhaps you don't know anyone that's been through suicide or anyone around you, but it actually, your book goes through other emotions and other feelings that you may relate to. And also this friendship thing. Most people have friends. So yeah, I really wanted to put that across, and I will think it's such an easy way out, and it's like, yep, I've done my bit, you know where I am when you need me, and that's it. Now it's all down to you, because if you don't reach out to me, I'm let off.
Exactly. I recognized how important it was for other people to learn what it looks like to be a good friend in this situation. And I dedicated an entire chapter to my best friend, who is the model of being a good friend, and always has been and is today and always will be. And there's practical stuff in that chapter that we can all learn from, including me, about the complexities of being a good friend to somebody, not just who's been bereaved by suicide, but somebody who's faced a trauma or is just struggling generally. So I would urge people to read that chapter in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, to anyone that's listening and is going through something similar, whether it's grappling with loss or parenting alone or just kind of feeling lost, what would you want to say to them?
I would want to say that from my own experience, there is hope, and I've been in that position where I felt there was nothing and there never would be. I know there is hope. I know that there is a different life beyond grief. It doesn't mean that grief or that trauma or that experience hasn't happened or will go away, but it means that we can learn to live with it and adapt our lives around it. I would say that I'm actually, in many ways, a better person than I was before Steve died, because I have a different understanding and appreciation for life and for the simple things. And I would say, when you're in the thick of it and things seem so overwhelming that you can't function, just take 1 hour at a time. Try really hard not to dwell on the past and the things that have happened. Try really hard not to worry about the future and how you're going to function next week, next year. Focus on what's in front of you right now. What challenge are you facing right now? What's the most important thing to you right now? And just sack off everything else, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Now is what matters.
That's great. Thank you. Caroline, thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's been a pleasure to have you on. And for anyone listening, if you want to read Caroline's book, everything will be in the show notes, and you also have a Substack community going on. So all of that's going to be in the show notes. But thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lovely conversation.